Yahtzee.
John Delancey.
Fair enough. For some reason I thought you were going to say Bosco, and I don't know why.
Because we've done that before.
We have done that before.
Now I just like to think of all the times that Q was on the ship, but his name was Yahtzee.
Yeah.
Take us back, Yahtzee.
Oh God, it's Boggle again.
Hungry, hungry hippos.
Oh, it's Q. He's Pop-O-Matic Trouble.
Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds.
Are they in the proper approach pattern for today?
Negative.
Hold the weapon! Now! Charge the lightning field.
I suppose you're wondering why you're here. It's simple. You're the best. At least I think you are. You've already figured out that if this weren't important, you'd still be in cryosleep, so I'm not going to waste your time, or more importantly, mine.
Welcome back to Dispatch Ajax. This is Jake.
I'm Skip.
Yep, you skip. Let me whisk you back to the year of 1994. January 17th, 1994, on the USA Network and also on Sci-Fi Channel, a little feature called TekWar premiered.
The year is 2045. The future isn't working out quite the way we planned.
I'll keep it short and simple. Tech chip, tech headset. Turn me on.
This chip can make your wildest fantasies seem true.
Incredible.
Tech has been outlawed.
Tech overdose.
It's been embraced by the underworld. The battle lines have been drawn. The tech wars have begun.
TekWar, the series, a USA Network original. Premieres Saturday at 7 with an all-new episode at its regular time, Monday at 10.
That was the first of the TekWar movies, TekWar the movie, followed by Tech Lords in February, Tech Lab also in February, and then Sellout, or TekWar Sellout, or Tech Sellout, who cares, in December of 1984. These actually did quite well, to the point where January 25th, 1994, flip that, reverse it. These actually did quite well. And so in January of 1995, TekWar The Show, Episode 1, came out and scored a 3.4 rating, which was reported at the time to be the highest rated premiere in basic cable history.
Now, granted, this is 1994 basic cable.
True, but still, TekWar was the highest rated basic cable premiere ever. Now, this was the latest journey for the multimedia franchise non-juggernaut that was TekWar. A property that started out as 9 schlocky novels, then comic books, then trading cards, then movies, then a TV show, and later a video game. A wide-ranging footprint for such a lackluster realization of a concept. Perhaps one of the biggest examples of media cult of personalities. A product completely sold on the name attached, rather than the quality or the specialness of the property. We will discuss it and its place on the Sci-Fi Channel, but as Jake, the main character in the books, not this Jake, but that Jake.
Wait, which one am I looking at?
It's all in one, baby. As he says in the books, try to relax and don't get excited. That's the secret of a successful life.
Thrilling. How thrilling.
One of the many knowledge drops that Jake provides. Let's travel back in time. Back to the early 80s. So at this point, as we all know, Star Trek had been done and dusted for a long time. After Star Trek, Shatner had tried to do many things, some TV work, some various movies, but he was essentially a failure in just about everything.
He did do the Battle of the Network Stars. That's what it was.
He was on it?
Oh, yes. He appeared in Battle of the Network Stars. He did multiple episodes of Columbo, because that's just kind of what you did back then. And he settled into Rescue 911.
So that was 89. So we're still in the late 70s, early 80s here.
Yeah, basically he'd only been in Columbo, TJ Hooker, a tiny bit later.
Yeah, TJ Hooker was coming up. Shatner had been failing in a lot of things. He was cast as the captain in a new cop show that had a different name, but when they saw the premiere and saw like what he was bringing to it, I guess, they reworked the show and made him the lead, renamed the show to his character, T.J. Hooker. That was in 1982, and that ran 5 seasons.
But we were skipping over Star Trek Phase 2, the project based on fan reaction and fervor create a second Star Trek show called Star Trek Phase 2, which brought back Shatner as Kirk, did not bring back Leonard Nimoy, but actually shot a few episodes, or at least the principles of a few episodes. And because it was shot and done around 1976, when Star Wars came out, all the studios were like, nope, we're making movies now. And so they scrapped Phase 2 in favor of Star Trek the Motion Picture. The re-emergence of William Shatner.
Yes, that was in 1979. And up until this point, he had had mostly failures. He had walked away from the Star Trek franchise. He had a, we'll say, cantankerous relationship with the fans and the character.
Did he ever?
That is something that's never really left him, but he realized that he needed to come back. That was kind of his meal ticket. That's what he was known for. So in 79, again, they made Star Trek the Motion Picture. Quite the success. They went on to do many sequels, as you guys know, which we don't need to cover, up until they were on the production of Star Trek V.
Oh, boy.
Now, they were in the midst of making that, but there was a union truck driver strike, which halted production of the picture. So essentially, they were kind of like left with nothing to do until that got resolved. None of the sets, none of the props, none of the people, nothing could be moved from place to place. So, with time on his hands, supposedly, William Shatner sat down and began to pen ideas for a novel in his downtime. Let's see. What have I done? Oh, I'm sorry, I should do this as time. Let's see. What have I done? I was a cop in T.J. Hooker and the captain of the Enterprise. What if I combine the two? So he made what he calls T.J. Hooker Meets the Fugitive in a Star Trek future.
It's like having Shatner in the room.
Get out of here, Shat. Nobody wants your hats.
That's Kevin Pollak. No, come on.
Fuck your father in the shower and have a sandwich?
I want to see Shatner deliver that line.
And TekWar was a bad novel.
Oh, yeah. Apparently so.
But TekWar was quite popular. In 1983, when the TekWar novel came out, it sold 500,000 copies and was quite popular.
Yeah, which was 80...
In 1993...
That's what I thought.
Take 97. In 1989, the first TekWar novel came out, and by 1993, 500,000 copies had sold of the first book. It was quite popular. That was the first of a 9-novel series.
Jesus.
Now, whether Shatner came up with the idea, or wrote it, or maybe just wrote an outline, it seems more than likely that Ron Goulart was the actual writer. Ron was a travelman writer for various sci-fi properties, comic books, writing a lot of like dime store sci-fi stuff. But William Shatner's name was big and bold on the front of the books. And Goulart was a professional ghostwriter, so it went under Shatner's name. TekWar is set in 2120, where Jake Cardigan, he's a grizzled cop, but he has an addiction to tech. Now, this is probably the thrust of the entire series, is the idea of tech. This is a future drug, but not a drug you ingest, but more that you wear. It interacts with your brain and separates you from reality. So you're kind of living your own fantasy world. It's addictive and can lead to death.
You know what? Not a bad premise on its surface. It's very cyberpunk.
Mm-hmm.
It's very neuromancer.
Yeah. Or Strange Days will come out.
Which is also kind of all taking from all of the neuromancer stuff.
Yes.
Before Johnny Mnemonic. It is actually a very cyberpunk idea.
Well, Johnny Mnemonic was only a couple years later.
Yeah. Well, which is also not neuromancer, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, but they're all based on that
yeah
neuromancer idea of
cyberspace.
Cyberspace, the creation of cyberpunk, as opposed to Star Trek, which is high ideals and clean aesthetics and interacting in space. Neuromancer and cyberpunk was the opposite. Gritty, it was more internal than external. It was all about getting online and inside the machine rather than exploring the outside world.
Think more Philip K. Dick than Gene Roddenberry.
Jake was addicted to tech, and he was framed for trafficking it. He was made to serve time in a cryogenic prison off-world, frozen for 15 years. But 4 years in, he was unfrozen and released by a shady character named Basco. Unfortunately, he comes back to his life and he's unable to be a cop.
Bosco!
Basco runs a private dick agency and employs Jake to take on the tech lords. These are the gang bosses in greater Los Angeles and try to get rid of tech.
Wow. I feel like this is... The crazy thing is, as dumb as this is, and as bad as the whole thing is, if you think about the time it's coming out and the other stuff that came out in the zeitgeist at that time, it's kind of right on point. I mean, it's right there with Demolition Man. It's right there with Time Cop. It actually is extremely timely. Accidentally, I think.
Yeah, that Demolition Man and Time Cop all coming out about the same time, 93 and 84, the same year this book came out.
Right.
It's in the zeitgeist. Tech is this way to escape from life, and Jake is an addict. Though it doesn't get used well in the first book, but obviously this was a thinly veiled allusion to Reagan's war on drugs.
Yeah, no shit.
With a mix of high Asimov-esque future and a twinge of gothic cyberpunk.
Yeah, it's very derivative and yet at the same time remarkably prescient, which is a strange contradiction. And the fact that it never caught on is both baffling and also predictable. I don't know. It's very, very strange.
It's tough. I mean, it's a mix of good ideas and not so good. You know, there are like kamikaze robots and humans that dress like robots, and people have sex with lifelike robots. The plants and the snow are fake, and tech is a fake reality, which is really kind of one of the major themes of the novels. It's this like look at what the future is and how unreal things are becoming, and what does that mean for our existence and for people and their personhood. But it also is filled with goofy portmanteaus, Xmas facts, or tech sex. Really kind of lame in a lot of ways. These were fairly standard, if not substandard, sci-fi fare with a few good ideas, but poor execution.
Yeah.
There was this idea of, against robots and doing drugs in the future and cyberspace wars, all of these things. But all the books seem to be self-contained. The characters seem fairly flat. A lot of the dialogue was rote and lame. There's a lot of weird racial stuff going on with it. There's a lot of Hispanic characters that have to throw in weird broken Spanish into all of their dialogue, which I would love to hear William Shatner have to do in an audiobook.
Well, essentially what they're doing is they're cribbing from Blade Runner with city speak. And watching a white Canadian Jewish man do dialogue from his own book about that kind of thing with Hispanic people would be both the most awkward thing I could think of and also oddly satisfying. I don't know. Oh, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, but I mean, Shatner, he obviously loved having his name on these and putting them out, but he described them as disposable entertainment. A true airport novel. You get to the airport, you have nothing to do for a couple hours, you pick up this book, you read it, and you throw it away. That's literally what he said.
Yes, though later on we will probably discuss the idea that he then had misgivings about putting his name on all of this stuff, which is totally ironic and hilarious considering exactly why he's doing this.
Yeah. But it did not deter him enough, because in 1992, 3 years after the first TekWar novel had come out, and the two other subsequent ones had come out at that point, the TekWorld comic book started up with Marvel Comics. TekWorld, which was through the Epic Comics imprint through Marvel, it lasted 24 issues, written by Ron Goulart and Evan Skolnick and artist Lee Sullivan, who had worked on previous sci-fi, cyberpunky properties like RoboCop and Judge Dredd. Really, from what I can tell, this seems to be the best version of this interpretation of the TekWar books. Mm-hmm. They're allowed to keep some of the more fantastic bits. The comic book storytelling format allows for maybe some of the schlockier elements of the stories to play out sequentially and maybe work a little bit better in the comic page. There is a fantastic element to this, and you can kind of roll with that in the comic book.
I think one of the reasons that Marvel approached Shatner about this project. He had pitched this to studios, multiple television and movie studios, who were not interested in any way, shape, or form. They thought it was niche. They thought it would cost too much to make. It wasn't as established as something like Star Trek. They didn't want to create a new franchise. I mean, this is like long before bullshit like Avatar or whatever. He wanted to make it set 200 years in the future and like super cyberpunk, and everybody said no. Then Marvel came to him and said the only way to make this vision work is if you do it in comic book form first. But even then, the argument that was made, and I'm not sure if it was made by Shatner or Marvel, but it was to be set 50 years in whatever current time span we are, kind of like Max Headroom, where it's like a sliding timeline. And I think that was because that was the demand of the studios. And if you wanted to get this property out there and then option it for film franchise, it had to be something that they were more willing to accept. And so they set it 50 years in the future from 89.
Looking at the comic book, it doesn't feel like that. But I know that when they did the show, it was.
Yeah, which was his entire premise. Like, he didn't want a comic book. The comic book was an afterthought. Though it was before this is not the format he wanted. This was just like his chance to get the property out there and maybe option it.
I'm sure the little chunk of change that he got from the rights certainly didn't hurt.
Oh, no, he definitely was into that, for sure. It's William Shatner. I mean, come on.
TekWar didn't necessarily help Marvel Comics, that's for sure. Especially for comic aficionados, TekWorld is a bit of a joke. I remember that I would constantly find them. In the old days, they used to package multiple comics up and sell them in different stores, like different toy stores or drug stores, things like that. And TekWorld, that didn't sell very well, was always shoved in those, and you'd always get stuck with these shitty comics. When I'm 10 years old, I do not want to read TekWorld. I did, and I didn't like it.
No, it wasn't good. It was never good.
It was not good.
If you'd go to the arcade and they'd have prizes that you could get with tickets, oftentimes they would have packages of comic books back to back. There's like 6 comics in this bundle, but you'd only see like the one in front or in the one on the back side.
Mm-hmm.
I'm specifically talking about the Fun Factory in the Independence Center in the Kansas City area. But they'd give you these bundles of shitty comic books they couldn't give away. And you'd open them up and it'd be like, oh, the first one was like, oh, this is an Avengers book from a while ago. It's like on its 3rd printing or whatever. And then behind it, it would be an Epic Comics or one of those other ones that use Tyvek for their fucking covers or whatever, you know? Yeah. And then you get like a TekWar in the back and you're like, ah, damn it. They always get me with this.
Yeah, that's how you get stuck with fucking TekWorld.
That's how it propagated.
But it only lasted 24 issues because it folded not long before Marvel went bankrupt. So maybe investing in TekWorld was not a good financial strategy.
Wow. I wonder how much that had to do with that.
I doubt that much. It was probably another straw on said camel's back.
Yeah.
I think they had much bigger issues than throwing peanuts at William Shatner.
I wonder if that's what got Jim Shooter thrown under the bus.
TekWar still was coming out in a wide variety of places. In 1993, the card company Cards with a Z made the TekWar trading cards with comic book art produced for the cards. That's a thing that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. In 1984, the producers...
I have a little bit on this. So after the TekWar comic books came out, all of a sudden, studios were actually interested, though they weren't before, which is funny because it was a failure of a comic book on a failing comic book publisher. But whatever. They hired a producer named Stephen Roloff, was hired by Atlantis Films, who's Shatner's organization, because I don't think he's really making day-to-day decisions necessarily, aligned with, because they were the ones who were going to give him the best deal for the property. Roloff talked about his role after this point. And this is important because it proves that Shatner had no real vision. He had no real concept of what he was going for or what it would mean. But I think stumbled his way ass backwards, sort of Mr. Magoo style, into this media conglomerate thing that could have worked, but ultimately didn't. Roloff said, quote, "I was just supposed to sit around and think about how we would actually try to create the future for television on a television budget with restrictions, knowing that we wouldn't be financed like Star Trek," which is hilarious because that had no money, "and to put together a pitch book. So I did that over a period of a few months and put together a pitch document which included a series of images and a kind of written description of our world. That went out, and after a little bit of wheeling and dealing, Atlantis Films struck a deal with Universal."
Yeah.
Basically, this is a non-idea, a nebulous non-idea that was ghost-written and formed into an idea that made books, then pitched to studios that didn't want it, but was then picked up by Marvel, who made a book that no one liked and bought, and then studios were like, "Great, let's do it. Sign him up," and then hired a guy to figure out how to make it work. And he was like, "I don't know what the fuck to do with this."
Yeah, supposedly the owner of Atlantis Films, or like the head executive of production, was actually a fan of the TekWar novels, and it's because of him that the project was given the green light, and he was given some money and hooked up with the Universal.
What if that guy wasn't a fan? Like, that never would have happened. Of course, it kind of didn't happen anyway. I mean, it happened, but no one remembers it happened, so it didn't happen, you know? So that's fascinating the way that that works. Because, like, what if it had been a hit? We'd have reboots and franchises and everything, you know? Like,
well,
that's...
We'll get to that.
Oh, yes. Yes, we will.
In the works.
Oh, boy.
But through that deal with Universal, they went ahead into production of 4 feature-length films that would essentially act as the first season of a TekWar show. If that did well, they would greenlight more, and it would become an ongoing TekWar program. Because of some of the budget stuff, a lot of things within the TekWar story were changed. Namely, all the space stuff, namely all the robots and robot tech, all of the gritty cyberpunk world that they were trying to create.
Mm-hmm, all the Blade Runner stuff.
Yes. Got to get rid of all that. And because the original ones were set in, I think, what was it, 2140 or 2120, something like that, because the budget was so low and they weren't going to have enough to do all of the production design and the special effects and whatnot, let's roll it back. So they just sent it 50 years in the future so things could seem more normal. And instead of being on a space prison in cryosleep, he was just, in L.A., Toronto, for everything.
100% Toronto.
So much Toronto, so many Canadian actors, so many Canadian spaces. There are multiple times in the making of both the movies and the show, there are things they talk about. Like, there's a bit where there are some revolutionaries for nature. They're militant, and they're right on the edge of LA, and they're like a paramilitary group that is doing incursions.
Eco-terrorists.
Yes. They're just in a forest outside of Greater Toronto, and it doesn't make any sense in the context. There's so many times like it's a dark world, but it's just sunny Toronto. They talk about, oh man, I remember when birds used to exist. You just heard birds last episode. There was
Yeah.
You can't. This doesn't quite work with some of the story that they wanted to tell, but it is what it is.
Side note, and very funny, I think. I was rewatching some of Strange New Worlds, and they do that episode where La'an goes back in time and runs into Khan, and she's with the alternate universe Kirk, and they don't pretend. They just go to Toronto.
I love that. You're like, oh, if you're going to shoot everything Toronto, at least just like Toronto can be a place. Yeah, I just said it there.
It's a place that exists. It's fine.
It doesn't have to be New York or LA. It can just be Toronto.
Yeah, you don't have to pretend that Vancouver is fucking Georgia. Like, you could just, you go, hey, we're in Toronto. This is a North American city. We're from the future. It's all kind of the same thing. Fuck it. No, this is Toronto. We're not going to pretend anymore. We're shooting in Toronto. Put it in Toronto. Who cares?
Yeah.
That way you don't have to do weird cutscenes where you're showing the fucking LA skyline or whatever. It's fine.
So by the time the show came out, William Shatner had envisioned himself as Jake Cardigan when he was writing the books. But in the early 90s, he realized I'm too old to play this character. So he took over the role of Bascom, shady boss who gets him out of prison. And Greg Evigan took the role of Jake Cardigan. He's a New Jersey-born actor, just kind of a generic, dully, good-looking kind of guy.
Yeah, did a bunch of Columbo and Murder, She Wrote. I literally saw him on a Columbo episode the other day. I've seen him in a Murder, She Wrote episode. I've seen him in... he was probably in a Matlock episode. I mean, just generic, good-looking dude.
Yep, just kind of in lots of B-movie, straight-to-TVs, your Megacondas, your Phantom Racers, your Hoboken Hollow. You know, just...
I thought there was one that was really good, but I can't remember now. I don't even want to
I mean,
it up,
the best thing he probably was in maybe Deep Star 6.
That's a good one.
It's solid. It's solid enough. It's not great.
It's a poor man's Abyss.
Yeah.
Or a poor man's Leviathan. I don't know which one. I don't know which level that's on. Or those tiers. Leviathan at least had Peter Weller in it, so it's like...
Leviathan has Peter Weller. That's a step up.
Yeah.
But...
it's probably Deep Star 6, Leviathan, and then Abyss.
Wait, as in like which one is... I'm sorry. Which one's
Quality.
higher or lower on this?
Well, I think Abyss is good.
Okay, so you were ranking from lowest to highest, is what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, and there are others as well, but they're not even really worth mentioning.
And really, Greg was coming off of probably his biggest continuous work, which was My Two Dads with Paul Reiser.
Oh, yes, that's right. I was going to mention that.
He took TekWar as kind of like, hey, let's do something a little different, you know? A little less wholesome. Let me do some action, and I'm going to be a guy... a leading man guy.
You can't blame him, though. I mean, he does have a look. He's a little generic looking, but he's a conventionally attractive guy. You can see how he could be a leading man. I mean, look at fucking Shatner.
Let's be honest. He had little to work with here.
Very little to work with.
I mean, everybody on the show had very little going on. You know, other than Evigan and Shatner, I'm trying to think of anybody else who had much to say. There's Tori Higginson, who did a whole lot of Stargate. SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis.
Wow. Okay. I mean,
there was Natalie Redford, who some X-Files and stuff.
Also shot in Canada. Yeah, just Canadian character actors.
Yeah. Lexa Doig, who did some Andromeda and Continuum, you know, some other sci-fi shows.
2 other Canadian-produced sci-fi shows, one of which was Gene Roddenberry. Yes, interesting.
Eugene Clark, who plays Gomez, his partner in the show. He was on Trailer Park Boys, the movie, and Land of the Dead, but he was kind of race swapped out for, obviously, Gomez is a Hispanic guy in the books, and it's a black man in the show. I would say the most interesting is Maurice Dean Wint, who plays Lieutenant Winger. Now, in the books, he's described as a tall, shiny chrome robot officer with like a stark white suit on. In this, he is just a dude.
Oh, boy.
But he is given a prosthetic forehead that makes it flat.
The classic Star Trek archetype.
He's doing the best acting here. He rarely blinks his eyes. He's kind of the antagonistic parole officer role for Jake in this. Now, what you may remember him from, he was the guy in Cube, or in Hedwig and the Angry Inch, he was the military man who provides the gummy bears for Hedwig.
Damn, I can't believe you're not a girl.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. No, I know exactly who you're talking about.
Exactly. It's very evocative in the memory.
Oh, absolutely.
But other than that, you have lots of, you know, just Canadian character actors. Most of the plot in the first 4 feature-length films revolves around the same crime boss that they are trying to take out. I think it's like Tagawa, though I could be mistaken on that. Anyway, but essentially they're just like establishing the world. The production's fairly low rent. There's a lot of like just plain dialogue. You know, there are some decent ideas there, a few decent lighting choices, but a lot of the action is really subpar. Poorly worked. The dialogue is so exposition heavy. They shove in things all the time, and there's so much of it's just boring. A lot of just like people sitting in a car. You're just filming them from the back, so you just see the backs of their heads, and they're just talking about the plot, what needs to happen in the next scene. It's kind of amazing that people took to this in the way that they did because of so little it had going for it. I think one of the movies is considered a throwaway filler episode of a TV show, but they made it into a feature-length film.
Yeah.
I do not know why. And there's so much about the story that is ridiculous, but each of them kind of fits into one of the books fairly closely up until you get to the series, which again, production on the TekWar TV series was dependent on the TV movies doing well. And according to Variety, stations that picked up the action-packed block, that was...
oh, boy!
Yeah, that was the block of programming.
We've talked about the action pack before.
Yeah, yeah. Those stations that picked up the block for syndication did major ratings boost, with TekWar as kind of their shining example that people seem to flock to. So
Yeah.
it was picked up by the USA Network due to its massive success, and as I stated before, became the highest rated premiere in basic cable history. But because it's TekWar, and I think because maybe some people saw it, ratings quickly fell off and viewers dissipated with subsequent episodes, and it was canceled a bit over halfway through its first and only series. Though technically, when they showed it, the TV movies were counted as the first season, and the 45-minute episodes were the second season. Because when you start the first episode of the TekWar show proper, it doesn't give you, it just assumes you saw the movies and just jumps in. You're just in the tech world knowledge base. And again, this is something that a lot of other shows did. I think Hercules did this, a show that we spoke about on our SciWhy FU series that we're currently doing right now. Lex did the exact same thing, making these movies counting as the first season, and then the success or failure of those prompted the show after that. So it ran 18 episodes, same cast, although Shatner wasn't in every episode, which was a bit of a disappointment, as he was one of the more engaging aspects of the show. Kind of fun. He did direct both the first episode, Sellout, and the last episode, Betrayal, bookending the series.
What kind of message is he trying to send there?
It was kind of the same fare, maybe slightly better in a shortened format. There was less lag because they weren't beholden to the books for their plot as much. They were kind of able to write new things within the world with some interesting new ideas. But a lot of like the ridiculous stuff that happened in the books, when he's thawed out, it's been years, so his wife and his son had left him, and he goes to save this scientist woman and her husband, but there is a robot woman that has taken her place. He kind of like falls in love with the robot woman, but when she's killed, the actual woman that he found just leaves her husband and decides to become his girlfriend for reasons.
Okay.
And then in the show, again, this same thing happens, but she is quickly killed off. And then his wife comes back because convoluted reasons of how the son murdered this now stepdad. And it was just shoving things in. And there's so many times when Jake he's either overexcitable or completely nonplussed. He's on either extreme, and the character doesn't work very well. You don't really get a good feel for anything that's driving him. And also, like, he's supposed to be detective, and the detective work is shoddy at best.
Oh, yeah.
He mostly just bumbles into various adventures of the day, happens to know XYZ disposable characters that will feed him plot information and details for said episode, who quickly vanish, and then it just wraps up, and it resolves itself.
Yeah, it's like how to not do Columbo, which Shatner was doing often at this time.
Yeah, Columbo without any of that, I don't know, police work?
Yeah, any of the actual technical stuff.
Yeah.
It also feels like if Runaway was a series.
Yeah, but at least you felt like that guy had some technical know-how. I feel like Jake is just like this disgraced cop who's like, I'm on the edge, but I'm really not, and I care, but I don't. Tech.
I've got vices, but I don't do drugs. Okay.
That's the whole thing. He was a drug addict. The premise of the story is that he was addicted to the thing that the whole story's trying to get rid of. But after their first book and the first episode of the show, Gomez, his partner, finds him doing tech after he comes home and his life is ruined. And he's like, I'm not going to do tech no more. And then he just doesn't for no reason.
There is some potential here for interesting stories and characters. I mean, because there are a couple of movies about that. Like, what is the movie? Rush. There are ideas here that work, that would make sense and would be compelling, but they never want to go far enough to make them interesting. They just want to make a procedural shot in Canada that vaguely, superficially links with Star Trek because he calls it tech and it's William Shatner.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be kind of cyberpunky, but not really.
not really.
You do have some scenes of like hackers on their decks, traveling the web,
Yeah, that's true.
saying their goofy future speak. But it's 1994 graphics. The CGI is bad. It's very like Lawnmower Man-esque,
Oh, big time.
but like without the money.
It's like Lawnmower Man 2.
Yeah.
We're dealing with Matt Frewer, famous Canadian actor, also in Star Trek.
Yeah, but even though TekWar was on USA Network and Canadian TV and the SciFi Channel, it was also being made into a video game.
I want you to take down Carlisle Rossi's operation. He conducts business from somewhere near People's Park. Try to bring him back for questioning. If the tech lords think he's selling them out, it might buy us some time.
In 1994, Capstone Software made TekWar, the video game, which was first-person shooter before first-person shooter was a title.
Yeah, Doom-esque.
Doom-esque.
Or Wolfenstein and Doom-esque.
Yes. The thing that is different is that this was from the build engine created by Ken Silverman. Now, Ken had seen Doom and thought, oh, I can do that, but a little better. And so he went on to make his own like FPS engine, which would become the build engine, and achieved fame with the shooter Duke Nukem 3D.
Wow.
It is through Duke Nukem that it kind of like reinvigorated the idea of the first-person shooter, and it changed the way like Doom was one thing and Wolfenstein was another, but Duke Nukem was a different thing. It added some different graphic possibilities and some interactions with the world. Another game was, I think it was Star Wars, was it Dark Force Rising?
That sounds right.
Which again was a first-person shooter. Came out about similar time. The problem with the game of TekWar, which is, I believe, by a lot of people considered one of the worst games made of all time.
Wow, that's saying something.
The graphic design was awful. It was like this pseudo 3D graphics, but also like this photorealistic stuff, and it's horrible to look at. The game layout is horrendous. Your interaction with people and the environment is really bad. And apparently, as you progress through the game, you get to this point that's almost at the end where you go, quote unquote, into the net, and then it's like this polyphonic nightmare of flashing lights and weird sounds, and it was hard for me to watch people play it, let alone play it myself.
A polyphonic spree, as it were.
But a lot of people, this is how they know TekWar. They played this game, they knew of this game. It's through the TekWar video game and its failures, but is how it's known. But it really kind of was a stepping stone for a lot of other games to be made that really progressed the first-person shooter realm of games into like the next generations after that. Kind of a bridge between a Doom and the next stuff.
GoldenEye.
Sure, a GoldenEye, but you have to have some failures that don't quite work to see why they don't work, and then improve upon them and make things that really do. So at least TekWar was good for that.
Doesn't that sound like Shatner in a nutshell, though? He was the third pick for the captain of the Enterprise. He had his moment. They kept up with it. They brought it back. He became iconic, but then they figured out how to do it better later.
Yeah, it's TekWar kind of through and through. A premise that has some legs, but it's kind of half-assed almost all the way through, and they keep plugging away at it in In 2009, Blue Water Productions, Scott Davis and Eric Owen, they made TekWar Chronicles, another comic book based on the TekWar world, currently available digitally through Devil's Due Digital. There was also some production that didn't quite come to fruition for a TekWar animated adaptation. It was supposed to be developed and written by Matt Miknovitz, who you might not know, but he was a writer on 24, on the Star Wars Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels and Bad Batch. He did a lot of that. A guy who knew about animation and these sci-fi stories and, had some heft behind that. It was supposed to be produced by Pure Imagination Studios with Shatner's Shatner Universe.
In a future I created called TekWar.
In 2021, but it still has not come to be.
Hasn't quite materialized, as it were.
Indeed. But one thing that has materialized, strangely enough, is TekWar itself. The TekWar multimedia franchise. This intellectual property that seemed to have no legs but spawned all of these different avenues for telling this generally mediocre and, by Shatner's own admission, throwaway story about a pseudo-cyberpunk future with a disgraced cop battling a technological drug to little or no fanfare, really. The cultural footprint of TekWar, despite running the gamut of books, TV, movies, comic books, trading cards, video games, it equates to a one-off joke in the Simpsons episode. Nobody really knows about TekWar nowadays. It's so odd. How did this middling property get so much traction in the greater multimedia landscape? What other properties have that kind of reach, especially things that aren't great? You can see how a Star Trek or a Star Wars, Marvel and DC comics properties, things like that, they have that scope to do things. Or other, movies like a RoboCop or a Terminator, things that have these really fascinating concepts, really good initial property vehicles, maybe even great sequels, and then spun into like video games and comic books and TV shows and multiple sequels. But those all come from a truly great initial realization.
Right.
TekWar didn't have that. TekWar had Shatner's name. That's it.
Yeah.
But yet it had so many legs.
This era was the peak of Star Trek. We're talking about 94. So TNG had just ended. DS9 was in its second season. Generations is coming out. By the time you get to like season 5 and 6 of... And I think that carries it to a certain extent, although kind of coincidentally, because other than Generation, Shatner had sort of written off Star Trek. And I think he was trying to piggyback on all of that. And because this is his first attempt to go back to the sci-fi genre in general. This is a really amazingly weird property because it both is of its time, but also an enigma even in its time. Wasn't popular, didn't have any fan cachet behind it, but managed to span a multimedia approach, the type of which we would not see again for years. Not that it was successful, but it did seem to work at the time. And now that's almost the standard for multimedia properties now. He failed to make it a movie, so then he tried to make it a TV show. And then Marvel Comics picked it up, and so he made it a comic book. And then it became a movie again, sort of. And then it became a TV show. So that he had novels, comic books, TV shows, video games. Kind of not on purpose. He stumbled his way backward into how media would work later. And that's really bizarre. The only thing that it reminds me of that I can even come close to likening it to is, do you remember the show Defiance?
Yes. That was let me see if I can, off the top of my head.
Sure.
It's kind of a sci-fi western, in a way, set in St. Louis.
Yes.
After aliens had come... I think there had been a war, and now there's like an uneasy alliance with aliens and humans living in the same place.
Yes, this is also a Sci-Fi Channel show, by the way, which is very funny. Yeah, essentially that. But the idea was, when they launched it, the premise was they were going to release as a television show and also concurrently a video game, like a massive, so that you could explore this world through other places affected by this. because the show was set in St. Louis, and then the video game was set in like LA or New York or something. I can't remember, but it was supposed to be set somewhere else. And so the idea was that they would be interactive, that they would be like a multi-platform universe to create an entire continuity around this project in multiple platforms. It didn't work. The show wasn't very good, and apparently the game wasn't very good. But it's the closest thing I can think of to what TekWar accidentally stumbled into. Which is, I guess, kind of how like evolution works. Shatner just kept failing at all these things, and so he kept finding different avenues that were willing to bank on his name. And then all of a sudden, it was a multimedia thing, and now multimedia properties are all the rage. You know, it portended things to come accidentally. And didn't even work. But for some reason, everybody's like, there it is. That's the way.
Yeah, so bizarre. Really.
How bizarre.
That's a fastball down the middle of the plate right there.
Oh, damn it. When he knows that he's sort of like been written out of the cultural zeitgeist for good reason, keeps coming back. Like the Terminator.
You cannot get rid of the Shat.
You can't. Most of the original series cast, he's in his 90s.
He's still out there, possibly the most recognizable element of that cast. Keeps putting out shows and books.
He wrote a bunch of Star Trek novels.
Yeah.
Which were ghostwritten, of course, by the Garfield-Stevens couple, who famously write a bunch of Star Trek novels. Kept trying to come back to Star Trek, eventually. There's a good Roddenberry production thing that actually a very good video about him visiting Spock on Spock's deathbed. He keeps shatting all over society. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. This wasn't good, but it was a big deal on SciFi Channel that they landed.
Yeah, I think it occupies a space for the SciFi Channel in a couple of things that they really wanted and were pushing for, especially in that 90s into the 2000s era. One was a possible franchise of a product that had legs, that had some cultural zeitgeist behind it, and could spawn more seasons and possible spin-offs. Obviously, that didn't happen. But I think what they really liked was their Starfucker approach, is that they wanted names. And Shatner is, I mean, especially 1990s, the biggest name in science fiction.
Yeah, I mean, who else do you get? A lot of the older dudes had died. I mean,
yeah.
Who is the number one name in this genre?
I mean, it's probably the Shat.
William Shatner. It's either him or Nimoy.
Yeah, so if you put William Shatner's TekWar, hopefully people are going to flock to it. And, strangely enough, they did. At least for an episode.
Yeah, right. Yeah, an episode before they realized it sucked so hard.
Yeah. That first episode they came to, it's like, it's not an awful episode. It's just bland.
Kind of he's nothing. It just feels like an amalgamation of other things.
Yeah. The show was never bad. It was just kind of dull and a little uninteresting. And it didn't get enough Shatner to like make it quirky and interesting. It didn't have enough of the action or science fiction elements or really pushing some of those sci-fi ideas. It just kind of like politely was middle of the road, and that just wasn't good enough to keep it going, sustaining, or relevant long term, which is how we get it as lost property.
If it had come out a couple years later, like when UPN launched, that would have been a UPN stand. But it would have been like a Nowhere Man or The Sentinel, one of those UPN shows that lasted way more seasons than it had any right to. The fact that it was part of the action pack feels like that was their best shot at that point, like Hercules and Xena and all that shit. Maybe if they had had more behind them, somebody like Sam Raimi, maybe it would have worked. This isn't that much different than a lot of other shows that I've seen in that ilk that lasted way longer than this. The last, 4 episodes of the show didn't even air?
Nope. They canceled it and left them on the shelf.
It's just, that's it. Last night I was watching MST3K and they did Master Ninja with Lee Van Cleef. That was a 13-episode series that they canceled and then didn't release it as a series, but in a series of movies, quote unquote, where they just mashed the episodes together. This didn't even get that. And yet, everybody's like, this is the way we're going to do business.
Well, I mean, you can see it, and you can see how it works. You just need something good, I think.
At least watchable.
Yes. It's amazing that the thing that spawned that revolution in the way that intellectual properties are distributed, multimedia-wise, was something that just didn't have any legs from the get-go.
No.
A completely no cultural cachet, disposable entertainment property that no one really wanted, and
no one was asking for. 10 years later, it might have actually worked.
Maybe. They keep trying.
Sure.
Maybe TekWar will come again someday. Maybe as an animated show, it might do decent.
I mean, maybe. I don't see the appeal any more of that than what we've got now. I don't.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's not that bad. I'm kind of surprised it didn't at least have a couple of seasons. If it had come out maybe just a few years later, when it had been around when they took over the action block or whatever, maybe it would have worked. I don't know. Who knows? It's very confusing. There was no sincerity behind it. It was just a cash grab by William Shatner. I think that's probably the long and short of it. It was Shatner trying to cash in on his name, even though he himself was wary of that. He was afraid of doing that, of putting his name on it. Everybody involved wanted to call it William Shatner's TekWar. And he was like, what if it fails? I look like an asshole.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, and you know what? He was right. It's hard to wrap your head around the fact that he was right almost on every level here. Just like he was third pick to play Kirk. Boy, he's a fail son that keeps stumbling into advancing the culture that we have now. Maybe this is the most Shatner thing that ever happened.
He's the too big to fail.
But also not big at all. And fails constantly.
That's just if you, go by reality. But in my tech reality, he's winning, baby.
It's a baffling property to look into, and I would encourage any of you, if you have, downtime, because I wouldn't make it a priority, but if you can check out TekWar.
Yep, and Skip, you said that the game is now playable via your browser online?
You can. If you go to myabandonware.com, you can play William Shatner's TekWar in your browser. So have fun with that.
How much do you hate yourself?
Yeah. Are you bored playing Doom or Wolfenstein? Then play William Shatner's TekWar.
But in the meantime, before you boot up your tech deck and listen to the future,
In a future I created called TekWar.
check out the next episode of Dispatch Ajax, which will be coming down the pike, and like, share, and subscribe this one. We hope you've enjoyed. We've obviously enjoyed bringing this Shat reality to you. If you wouldn't mind leaving us 5 Shat hats on the podcast app of your choice, ideally Apple Podcasts, it's the best way for us to heard and thus seen. We'd greatly appreciate it. Follow us on social media. And check us out for our next episode, where we'll be, again, diving in to the SciWhy channel universe and all that it had, all that it was, all that it could have been. But until the next episode, and they get hauled off to a space cryo prison to live out their unevolved fantasies in perpetual shittiness, Skip, what should they do?
Well, they should probably go watch Demolition Man. No, they probably shouldn't. Make sure they have paid their tabs, cleaned up after themselves to some sort of reasonable degree. Make sure they've tipped their bartenders, their KJs, their DJs, their wait staff, anybody involved who works a living wage. And make sure you support your local comic shops and retailers. From Dispatch, Ajax, Jake and I would both like to say, no matter where you go, there you are.
TekPod.
Please, go away.